This is Think Out Loud on OPB. I'm Dave Miller. Last fall, we spent a memorable week in Richland, Washington, near the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. We're going to listen back today to one of our favorite conversations from that trip. The poet Kathleen Flenniken has lived in the Seattle area for almost 40 years, but she grew up in Richland and worked as a civil engineer at Hanford in the 1980s. Then she became a poet. She served as Washington State Poet Laureate from 2012 to 2014. In her first year as Poet Laureate, she published a collection called Plume. The book explores her childhood in so-called Atomic City, the history of the Hanford site, and the death of her best friend's father from radiation illness. At the end of our week in the Tri-Cities, Kathleen Flenniken drove down from the Seattle area to join us in conversation. I started by asking just how far away we were from her childhood home.
We are about a 15-minute drive. I lived in the Ranch House district on Cottonwood Avenue, so that's a bit of a walk from here. Yeah, but it feels very familiar. Actually, I'm very close to Hanford High School, which is not the high school I went to. I went to Richland High School. I was a bomber.
What was it like? I understand that you've said that there was a sense of secrecy that came from the site. What was it like to grow up with secrecy permeating the world around you?
Well, I think we didn't know any better as very young children. That was the way it was. But I think as I grew older, I started sort of to be charmed by this idea that we were different than other communities, that we had something that other people didn't have. And there was always this idea in the air that we were a scientific community and we were called the Atomic City. So that set us apart. And very subtly, you start to get this sense of we are an us and the rest of the world is a them. And this idea that scientists understand what's going out at what we called the area. But other people who might have fears or complaints, they didn't understand the science. And so they didn't really they weren't in a position to make comments about it, really.
They were alarmists or they were ignorant?
Yeah, exactly. Or they needed to be educated. Yeah. And I felt that I was in good company. I mean, my parents and their friends, they were very ethical people. They were believers in science, and so that is a very comforting thing to be around. It felt like it was a great place to grow up.
Could you read us your poem, Bedroom Community?
Sure. Just to introduce it a little bit, Richland was known as a bedroom community to the Hanford site, so I heard that many, many times growing up, not necessarily understanding what it meant. It does refer to my friend Carolyn at the end, so she was my friend who grew up 4 houses down the street and whose father eventually died of a radiation illness. Bedroom community. We were all bedded down in our nightcaps, curtains drawn as swamp coolers, and sprinklers hissed every brown summer hour, or in winter, sagebrush hardened in the cold. It was still dark as our fathers rose, dressed, and boarded blue buses that pulled away, and men in milk trucks came collecting bottled urine from our doorsteps. Beyond the shelter belt of Russian olive trees, cargo trains shuffled past at 8 and 8, and the wide Columbia rolled by, silent with walleye and steelhead. We pulled up our covers while our overburdened fathers dragged home to fix a drink, and some of them grew sick. Carolyn, your father's marrow testified. Whistles from the train, the buses came, our fathers left. Oh, Carolyn, while the rest of us slept.
You have that line about trucks coming to collect bottled urine. What were they looking for?
Well, for people who are really exposed on a weekly or daily level, they would get their urine checked for, radiation on a weekly basis, or even more than that. My dad wasn't one of those people, but Carolyn's dad was. But you would see those trucks, and they were like milk trucks. So it was like a reverse milk delivery sort of thing.
And because you grew up with it? It just seemed like regular life?
Yeah, I did.
Of course, there are bottles of pee on some people's doorsteps.
Well, I mean, I had other cities to compare it to, but so I did know it was not what everyone did, but it was normal because it was our normal.
What can you tell us about Carolyn's father?
He was a laborer, and he was a very, very bright guy. He I think only had an 8th grade education, and yet he brought himself up. He was a Marine, and he eventually became the president of his labor union. He later worked in as a representative of his labor council, so he did very well by himself. But he also raised a family on a, relatively small income, and so he would go hunting and fishing to supplement the family table, and sometimes that was also a danger. So he was a hard worker and always looking for extra money, and occasionally he would get asked to go in and do what they called run in and run out, where he'd be cleaning what they called a crapped up site. And I think
up meaning a site that had been contaminated.
Exactly.
And that was a way to pick up some extra money.
Yeah.
Take another shift.
Exactly.
What happened to him health-wise?
Well, he contracted this very rare blood disease, which I can never remember the name of, but it's something that they saw in Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors. So it's definitely linked with radiation exposure. And he ended up getting treatment in Seattle at the University Hospital, where they sort of confirmed that diagnosis. And then when he came back to Richland, when he was seeing the Hanford medical staff, they suggested that maybe he had been exposed to farm chemicals in his youth or something like that. They didn't really sign on to this diagnosis when he was ill.
That's what we call gaslighting now.
Yeah.
By that point, it was very clear to him what had happened to him?
I think so. This is all related through Carolyn, but she did tell me that at one point, very close to the end of his life, he said that he'd trusted the wrong people. And that's very hard for someone who's devoted his whole life and career to a place and really believes in that place. He was a true believer. So for him to make that adjustment and to sort of acknowledge that he couldn't trust what he'd been told, that's a giant shift.
I wonder if you could read us another poem that gets to this. It's called Deposition, and it's a devastating poem, and it might need some kind of setup, since it like many of your poems, it's based on historical fact.
Right. So on February 3rd, 2000, the Department of Energy headquarters brought someone out to Richland to actually have a kind of open house or a deposition where people who had been made ill by their work at Hanford were invited to come speak in a public forum about their illnesses. And I can't overstate how difficult that would have been for people over their entire lives and careers, holding that in as part of I think as a sense of their loyalty. They would not talk about their illnesses. It was a taboo to talk about your illnesses. So on that evening, there was something like 600 people there who were there to talk and to listen and to share. I wasn't there. My friend Carolyn was there. Carolyn spoke about her dad, and a lot of other people spoke too. So this poem is sort of about me not being there, but thinking what it was like. Deposition. I wasn't there. I'd packed my car with houseplants years ago, confident my rawhide neighbors would change their camper's oil, mow and edge their lawns like always, street after street of Hanford workers who'd moved 30 years ago from West Virginia or Pennsylvania or Tennessee for a job. No saying what it was. For a prefab landscaped with white rocks, for their kids grown up like me, for their wives, hair freshly done, comparing prices at Safeway. You know one, you know them all, I said at 25, and moved away, brushed off the dust, and breathed in the liberal city. So I wasn't there when one by one they rose, walked stiffly up the aisle in the Federal Building auditorium, And yet I see them clearly, the same bastards who grinned when schoolgirls strolled by, who flirted with John Birch and hunted pheasant and owned their stools at the cinder-block taverns downtown, whose sons and daughters would appear at school sometimes with bruises on their arms. Carolyn was there to testify, and even she can't explain how anybody there met anybody else's eyes. It must have choked their throats like rotting meat, admitting to cancers and hothouse flower blood diseases, each a different suffering. How did they stand on stage and say what nobody could say aloud? And the ones who came but couldn't speak. It's killing to think of, even now. Every one of them ashamed for falling ill the way the anti-nuke fanatics said we would, who've never known crap about anything, who've never understood us and never will.
That is the poet and author, former State Poet Laureate for Washington, Kathleen Flenniken, reading her poem Deposition. There are such complicated emotions embedded there. Anger still at some of these men for what they made you or your classmates endure, and also such tenderness towards them for what they endured. There's also a switch in pronouns. Mm-hmm. It starts, I wasn't there, and it's about I and them. And at the end, it's these people who've never understood us. You put yourself back there. Where do you put yourself now?
Well, it's really interesting. I am still an us. It may not sound like that, but I am. And especially when I feel like there's some onslaught of critical, a kind of blanket idea that people here are evil or they're doing something terrible, that really brings in my old loyalties. And I feel like I have to defend this place. It is my hometown, and these are my people. And so I feel at heart that I will always be part of the us.
You didn't write your book about Hanford until a few decades after your parents died, as I understand it. Did you need that time to pass before you felt comfortable telling these stories?
I did. And I think partly I needed that time to even let myself start to investigate these stories. It's very hard to understand what happened here to our community, or with our community. I don't want to make it sound like we were done to, because in many ways we did it to ourselves.
That's an important point that I think I had to be here to understand, that the managers of the Department of Energy, the contractors, it's not like they were in Seattle or Spokane. They were right here. Everybody was together. This is your collective community, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And in fact, in my reading, when I was writing these poems, I found directives from the Atomic Energy Commission saying, you don't have to be so secret. It's better for the science for you to be talking about some of the problems that you're having so that we can bring in new, fresh ideas. But it was the people here who chose to keep things secret. And that's something I don't quite understand. It might be linked back to the war and kind of just continuing on with that idea. But it just perpetrated and was everywhere in the air through my entire growing up and through, I think, basically the entire history of the production at the site.
I wonder if you could read us another poem. It's called Whole Body Counter, Marcus Whitman Elementary. What was a whole body counter, and when would you encounter it?
So this is a shared memory that I have with the children of Richland that are my age. We all remember going into the whole body counter, which we didn't really understand what it was at the time. I actually found a quote from Health Physics magazine dated November 1965 talking about this mobile whole body counter. And it described it as, its versatile capabilities for measuring internally deposited gamma-ray emitting radionuclides in human beings.
Mobile, meaning like a bookmobile, like a little minibus would come to the parking lot?
It was like a semi-truck, and in the back there was this whole body counter. It was like going into a little tiny office in the back of a truck that had this equipment, this machine, where you would lie down and then you'd go through the machine.
Like an MRI.
Yes, I think like that. And
you were 5 or 6 years old. You were in kindergarten.
I was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old. Everyone we were all lined up to go in, and we all did it. And the strange thing isn't just that we went through this machine, but we never heard another word about it. To this day, I have no idea what they did with the data that they collected.
It reminds me, yesterday we heard that from a farmer in Altopia just across the river who said that regularly his tomatoes and pumpkins and the other things he grows, they get tested. He never hears back, which for him was good news.
Yeah.
Although one does wonder if you would have heard bad news.
Right. And I don't even have any idea if it was individualized. They were just collecting groups of data, for all I know, just to kind of get an overview of what was going on. Anyway, it is a very strong memory of childhood, which I finally wrote down.
Let's hear it.
Whole body counter, Marcus Whitman Elementary. We were told to close our eyes. Everyone was school age now, our kindergarten teacher reminded us, old enough to follow directions and do a little for our country. My turn came, and the scientist strapped me in, and a steady voice prompted, "The counter won't hurt. Lie perfectly still." And mostly I did, and imagined what children pretend America is. Parks bordered by feathery evergreens, lawns so green and lush they soothe the eyes, and pupils open like love, a whole country of lawns like that. Just once I peeked, and the machine had taken me in like a spaceship, and I moved slow as the sun through the chamber's smooth steel sky. I shut my eyes again and pledged to be still, so proud to be a girl America could count on.
Such a powerful last line, that twinning the dosages and patriotism, being someone you can count on. What did it mean to you to be a good American?
Oh, it meant holding on to secrets, even though I didn't know what the secrets were, but that sense of being vigilant, and knowing that we were doing something. It wasn't for me an active role because I was just a kid growing up, but, it went beyond, raising the flag on 4th of July. But really, there was something larger. It was like, we're doing something important for the country. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew that I was part of it in some way. And that felt patriotic.
The phrase you said before is that your friend's father, he had told Carolyn, your friend, that he had put his trust in the wrong people. In a sense, what we're talking about here is betrayal on a grand scale. I'm wondering how living through all of this and having a different understanding of it as the decades have gone on, how it's affected the way you think about people in authority, notions of progress, of science, of our country.
Yeah. Well, I think that patriotism is a word I've struggled with on and off, and that'll be an ongoing thing. But I love my country. I feel it's complicated, and that the main issue for me around this whole story is the idea of secrecy, that secrecy is an enemy of democracy. And that's kind of where I landed. I had a number of people come to me and say, "Oh, you must be so angry." As I was writing these poems, "Your poems must be so angry." And I tried writing angry poems when I was told I should be angry. I mean, in a kind of simplistic way, I thought, "Oh, that's right, I should be angry. I've been betrayed." And then eventually I worked through that and realized what I really felt was a kind of grief, and that the betrayal was really on. I had been part of the betrayal too. I feel like we had betrayed ourselves in many respects. And so I feel like it's less a story about America and more a story about the human condition in general, that there really are no good and bad guys, but we do these things to ourselves. And I guess that was the big takeaway for me that I'm still working on.
Kathleen Flenniken, thank you so much for coming down from Seattle just to be on this show in person, to come back to Richland. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. I've loved it.
Kathleen Flenniken is an author who grew up in Richland and a former state poet laureate for Washington. One of her books, a book that's full of poems about Richland and the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, is called Plume. We talked to her last fall when we spent a week in the Tri-Cities and Hanford.